When we're feeling blue or when we're going through different challenges in life, we all have different ways to tackle them. Some of us go and talk to friends and family. Some of us listen to music, watch movies that we like, whatever the case may be. And I hope that those are healthy choices that we make. The bottom line is that in actuality, what we're doing is that we are self-medicating such that we can shift our frequencies, more specifically brain frequencies, as well as, of course, biofrequencies, cellular frequencies. And whatever case we choose to do, if that is something that we want to do, basically once these frequencies are shifted, then suddenly we feel at ease and we feel a little bit better. There's one more way that you may or may not have been exposed to that is extremely helpful, and that is what I want to talk to you. And that particular thing is to get ourselves exposed to sciences. It could be anything from you reading a scientific paper, watching something scientific, or maybe even talking about some type of a science field with family and friends. It really doesn't matter, but it is as if it shifts our state of being, which in actuality is about brain frequencies and biofrequencies, as soon as we're exposed to that knowledge. And that is because it kind of aligns our state of being from being extremely emotionally into being more neutral when we're exposed to that. The first time I ever discovered this phenomena was when I was a kid. And so I'm going to share something from my childhood with you guys. And if you're not interested, just fast forward. But I grew up in a kind of a turmoil and volatile environment, not only being a refugee kid, but a lot of other stuff as well that don't want to bore you with the details. But the truth of the matter is that as a kid, I really didn't know what to do with those emotions, and I didn't really have anybody to ask and to talk to. And so I kind of was on my own to kind of figure it out. And one thing I noticed was that, the pain that it caused me, all these volatile environments, kind of made me search for how can I tackle all these emotions. And one thing I noticed was when I was reading books, and I hated books for one particular reason. And that particular reason was because as a kid, I used to get a lot of birthday gifts in books, because the country that I was born in, the time that I was born was pretty much 1 week before the huge New Year's / Christmas celebration in that country. So people really didn't want to spend money on buying a kid another gift. And so unlike all the other kids who got, fancy gifts because their birthdays were not at that time of the year, I used to get these gifts where people just had a bunch of books in their homes and they would just say, oh, just give her a book. So I remember most of the gifts that I would get was books, and I hated it because I wanted to have toys and I wanted to have like shiny stuff and things like that, but I never got it because people just didn't want to spend the money. And so what ended up happening was that I would just sort of go and save these books in my room or a place that I had, and then I would not touch them. But one interesting thing happened was that gradually I started kind of looking into those books, and some of them were actually heavy for a kid like my age. They were really heavy, but again, because they had a bunch of books over and they didn't know what to do with it, so they gave it to me. And so but the ones that were quite heavy, I realized that I discovered that they would really help shift my thoughts and my sort of the way I was thinking at the moment. That maybe I was emotional, I was crying, and I was going through a bunch of stuff. And just reading just one page of those books, it would immediately shift my state. And that's when I became interested and curious about brain. And at the time, and then I started exploring more and more. And then at one point, I realized that way in which I would handle those volatile situations was really up to me. And so sometimes I was just too lazy and I didn't want to deal with it, so I would just go and, into my cocoon and cry and whatnot. But sometimes I would then choose and say, no, you know what, today I don't want to feel like this. I don't want to hate my life. I really want to shift it. And then I would actually go and pick up a book and I would read it, and immediately, and I mean just one page. And that is what also got me more or less into studying the brain and studying how this sort of shift of state of being works. And then later on, when I went to school and whatnot, I was not really bright. I'm still not bright, but I kind of forced myself to get into those fields and read and take those classes. And I noticed that every time I did that, it was as if I was taking, a drug of some sort, because it immediately kind of took me to a whole different world. And that's what I needed. And up until today, even when I go through some turmoil and stuff, in fact, the reading about science or watching something scientific, etc., or talking to people about it, it kind of has become my salvation. That in addition to that, I also did sports, but that's another video. What I'm trying to say is that there is something about gaining knowledge, more specifically when it's solid, when it's legit, and when it's scientific, that sort of shifts our state. And then later on, when I had my own lab and I started doing actual research, some of it was pertaining to this particular subject that I'm bringing up, because when I was, for example, in lab and I was analyzing and collecting data of brain waves, I noticed that during the information search process, there is always a part of that phase where people feel confused and out of sorts and a little bit negative because they're looking for something. But then I noticed that the question that I gave them, if they were more about, hey, this is a little bit scientific, I want to learn and I want to know more, immediately their brain frequencies shifted and it became much more positive. And as a result, they felt better. And so it was kind of, for me, more proof that, hey, what I went through when I was a kid, it actually is true because I'm doing the research now in lab, and it's scientific and it's, with specific methodology and whatnot. So it felt more like legit at that time. And so that is actually another reason I set up the foundation, because I know that a lot of kids go through, maybe not specifically what I went through, but go through a lot of issues and a lot of turmoil, especially when they are underprivileged. And there's no doubt in my mind that this type of activities would help them. I strongly believe and know, based on my own experience as well as the research that I've done in lab, that being exposed to anything scientific can immediately help shift our brain frequencies and our biofrequencies, especially when we're going through turmoil, especially when we're going through a lot of emotions. And that's one of the main reasons I set up these foundations, because especially underprivileged kids tend to go through a lot more turmoil in their childhood. And I have a strong belief that such practices for them to get into learning about more sciences, especially cognitive sciences, will help them not only to shift their own frequencies, but also to help others as well. And of course, also to learn something scientific in their lives. The way I've set up this foundation is such that it is set up so that it encourages these kids, especially girls, because I want to support more women into cognitive sciences. it's set up such that they can choose any part of cognitive sciences. If it's about brain waves, that's even better. And to do something, what we call in sciences literature review or lit review. In other words, they just look and read what others have done. They identify a gap, identify something that they're interested in, and they think that there's not enough of information on it, and then explore it more. And when they explore it more, they can just write up maybe a couple of pages on it. And once I read it, then I will reward them. And that reward is mainly designed so that they would actually do it, of course, but also the fact that for them to really experience for themselves and discover for themselves whether, if they are engaging in something scientific, in some scientific activity, whether that's going to help their brain frequencies and their state of being to shift. Because every time we help shift these frequencies, we're taking one more step towards a healthier life. And I feel like, especially when people are underprivileged, because I was one myself and I know exactly how it feels, you tend to get into these sort of circular emotional sort of non-stop state of being, and it's really hard to get out of it. And most of the solutions that exist today, they just want you to talk about it, or they suggest you taking drugs for it. So it's either you have to go to a shrink and talk about it or take drugs. But a lot of times these kids, especially they're underprivileged, they don't have access to these. And even if they did, I personally don't believe in those, because I think that the more we think about it and talk about it, the worse it just gets. But a practice as such that I just mentioned, for example, for let's say a girl who's going through a bunch of stuff, for her to just sit by a laptop, and most of the people in the world today, they do have access to a laptop, even if they need to go to a public library somewhere. And then for her, let's say, to kind of just do a search and just read a few of these papers in her language or in English, and then come up with a sort of just writing up a little summary of those would be extremely helpful for the state of being of that person who does it. And it's amazing, because it really can shift, the state within a very short amount of time. Something that, in my opinion, we really can't get with any other treatment. And every time we do something like that, because it's positive, we take ourselves out of those emotional turmoil and we sort of become hopeful towards life. And as a result, then hopefully we'll take other steps towards life. And I think that that is a really huge salvation. I see reading about science or doing scientific work, anything of that sort, is a really salvation to a lot of us that have gone through turmoil and volatile and traumatic events to some extent. And I believe in this so much that I sort of, was working on my postdoc and then realized that this is also part of what I want to do in my postdoc. And so I basically gave away most of the stuff that I had and sold my property. I kept my outfits, because it took me a couple of years to find a lot of outfits that I like, and I like to dress up, so I kept those, but everything else is gone. And I invested them, did some investment, and then got some yield out of it. And that is that yield that I'm getting out of it, that is what I'm going to give as rewards to these kids, because it's not only about the monetary help for them, but I'm more interested in learn some tools, in this case, for them to get exposed to scientific material, because then I'm hoping that later on in their lives they can use that as a tool also to manage their that whatever they're going through. And of course, it's always good to learn new skills, because who knows, then maybe they get jobs in those fields, which is fantastic, because we really need more women, but also we need people who come from humble backgrounds, so that they can actually more diversity into the field of sciences, and hopefully make additional discoveries in the field. And so even if you are not belonging to that category, I'm sure that there are always sometimes in your life where you feel blue, where you don't know what to do, or maybe you go through some challenging situations. If you have not tried it, please try it just one time and see how it shifts your energy. Just pick one paper that you like, or just watch one video on YouTube. There are plenty of them. Or talk to somebody about something scientific, and I promise you, within a few minutes, your whole state of being will shift, and you will just become more hopeful. I feel much better, and yeah. So that's all I had for today. I hope you find it useful. I'll see you next time. Bye.